LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the April 9th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 19 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. I'll start off with both Saturday Night Live clips from last night. Alec Baldwin came back, both doing a parody of Donald Trump and a parody of Bill O'Reilly talking to each other, which is the first clip I'll show you in just a moment. Then he also just played Donald Trump talking a little bit about this Syria thing, which is the main topic. It's the only topic. It actually, for once, for the first time in several weeks, has pushed the whole Russia collusion in the with the Trump administration or the Trump campaign, and whether there was collusion in affecting the U.S. election in 2016. That's been pretty much pushed out of the shows this morning, and so there'll be some talk about Russia, but and there were some questions that I didn't take clips from about the one or two about the collusion in the election campaign to Rex Tillerson. I think George Stephanopoulos asked him that. I will have Rex Tillerson's first Sunday morning interviews, and a couple, both from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos and CBS's Face the Nation. The Secretary of State does his first Sunday morning interviews, and basically the two main parts of the Syria topic will be the Russia aspect and whether it's a flip-flop by Trump, you know, before he was against intervention, and is he changing his stance on whether Assad has to go at the same time that they get rid of ISIS. And then the second part is whether it's unconstitutional for the president to use force in this way, and several different viewpoints on that. And I'll give you my lawyer's perspective, having studied the Constitution, and I have a copy of the Constitution. It fell off. I'll show it to you a little bit later. But like I said, I want to start off with several political comedy clips, both from Saturday Night Live and from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. The first one I want to show is this excellent clip from last night's Saturday Night Live, where Bill O'Reilly played both, Alec Baldwin played both Bill O'Reilly and Donald Trump, talking mostly about Bill O'Reilly's supposed sexual harassment, all the money, the $13 million Fox News has paid out in sexual harassment suits from Bill O'Reilly, and how Donald Trump actually supported him during sexual assault or sexual harassment month. But then there's a little bit of a reference to Syria in this first clip I want to play you over here.
Can I just say, Mr. President, you look even better on TV.
I know, I do. I look fantastic. And can I tell you something? I actually see a lot of myself in you, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for coming to my defense last week, even though no one asked you to. And you even went as far as saying, quote, Bill O'Reilly did nothing wrong.
That's correct.
And that's based upon...
hunch, just a loose hunch.
So you're not familiar with the facts of the case?
I mean, I'm more familiar with this case than I am with, say, healthcare, but I didn't really look into it much, no. I was too busy being super presidential by bombing a bunch of...
Well, I deeply appreciate your support on behalf of all women, and I'd like to thank you, Donald Trump, for promoting Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
That's right, Bill. It's a subject that's near and dear to my hand.
Well, thank you for stopping by The Factor, Mr. President, and keep up the good work.
So that was obviously not live on Saturday Night Live, since Alec Baldwin was playing both parts. I thought that he did a decent job of both impressions. There were a couple, you know, I've watched way too much Bill O'Reilly over the years, and he had a couple of, not the accent so much, but a couple Bill O'Reilly mannerisms down, and I thought that his Donald Trump impression was a little better than some of the other weeks. It wasn't so much of a caricature, and it was even better, I thought, in the cold open. And you notice there was just a brief reference to Syria there. There were a couple, you know, about how he was being presidential and bombing stuff or whatever he said. And there was also, you'll see a couple references to Syria in the cold open, where Donald Trump goes and talks to some of his strongest supporters out. I think it ended up being in Oklahoma, and we can watch that clip over here.
Thank you. Thank you. We all love Trump, don't we? We do, we do. I just had an amazing week, folks. I met with leaders from China, Egypt, and Jordan. Gorsuch was confirmed. The media is saying nice things, and no one is talking about Russia. Well, what a difference just 59 Tomahawk missiles can make. I wanted to spend 20 minutes today with my people, folks who don't whisper, "Oh, God, what's happening?" but after I leave the room. But I know how hard it is out there for you. Things have changed so much since I was growing up. For example, a lot of poverty is white now. Is that crazy? Let me hear from you. Do you like that I bombed Syria? You right there?
Yeah, so there you can see Alec Baldwin as Donald Trump asking one of his strong supporters out there, one of the, people who are the, I guess you would call the low information voters, and that's, you can see the entire video, by the way. All the videos, the political comedy videos I'm showing are available free on YouTube. The Saturday Night Live ones and the Real Time with Bill Maher ones are all available free on YouTube at links down in the video description. Should have mentioned, there's a link down there to this clip list, which you can look at my 19 clips and try to decipher my notes so that you can skip between the clips if you want. I also, like I said, I thought that the Donald Trump impression by Alec Baldwin was better there, and I thought that the Donald Trump jokes were better written, that the writing was better, and they didn't really rely so much on broad comedy. And of course, Louis C.K., who was the host, was great. I did not take any Louis C.K. clips. He didn't really talk about politics or Donald Trump. He did some interesting things about racism. And down in the video description, there's a link to the Saturday Night Live YouTube channel. The entire Louis C.K. monologue is there, which I highly recommend watching, even though I didn't take any clips from it. I do have a quick clip from Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO, Bill Maher's monologue, where he made a couple good jokes. One has sort of a tinge of racism, or a sort of allusion to racism in it, but it's actually their Syria jokes. Not that the Syria situation is that funny, but there's always political comedy when there's politics, and here's Bill Maher talking about what Donald Trump has done in Syria this last week over here.
That's what happened. American cruise missiles blew up an airfield last night in Syria because the dictator there was using chemical weapons, which he has done many times. In 2013, 98 Republicans signed a letter saying bombing Syria in response to a chemical attack was unconstitutional without congressional authorization. But this is different because Obama was president then. That would have involved bombing while black. And you can't do that. This is very tricky for Donald Trump, because the Syrian regime, of course, is propped up by Russia, and Russia does not want us bombing there. If Trump does the wrong thing, Putin might not re-elect him.
So yeah, you can see there Bill Maher addressed both the Republican hypocrisy on how they were so against this bombing of Syria when it was, as Bill Maher would say, President Blackenstein who was doing it or proposing to do it. But then there was the second joke that sort of alluded to the whole Russia control, which will come up in a series of clips I'm going to show. But before I get to the actual news, there was some quasi-news on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher on the panel, and this part of the panel discussion is again available free on YouTube at a link down in the video description. And in this clip, you'll see Bill Maher questioning a Democrat in Congress, Representative Ted Lieu, who he's from California, and I am aware of his career a little bit. He used to be in the California legislature, and I was aware of some of his bills back then, and now he's recently in the U.S. Congress. And Bill Maher asks Ted Lieu, well, Donald Trump is going up against Syria and Assad, who's a big client of Vladimir Putin and Russia. Doesn't this blow the whole liberal theory about Russia being involved in, Putin being involved in getting Trump elected, and Trump being a puppet of Putin? Puppet? No puppet. You're the puppet, if you remember from the debate. That's one of my favorite lines from the entire 2016 campaign. But you'll see here that this is your basic conspiracy theory logic. I have to admit, even though I agree with Representative Ted Lieu that any evidence that contradicts your conspiracy theory is just evidence of the cover-up, which Ted Lieu expresses in response to a question from Bill Maher over here. But then Bill Maher also talks about several tweets that Donald Trump made over the last several years that show how he's a big flip-flopper on Syria, which will be a topic I will talk about a little more in the news clips in just a minute after we watch this HBO Real Time with Bill Maher clip from last Friday here.
So let me ask our liberal here on the panel, how does the fact that he went up against Russia, Donald Trump, fit into the the liberal idea that he was installed by Putin as a stooge to do whatever Putin wanted? This is not what Putin wanted.
If you're facing possible collusion with Putin, you might just want to distract people.
So you're pretty big distraction. That's what you think this is? I'm just asking. It might be.
It might be. We don't know. I've learned to not predict Donald Trump.
Right.
But in this case, what he did was not only unconstitutional, there's no strategy. We don't know what we're doing in Syria, how long we're going to be there. He's got U.S. ground forces there now. They're more at risk of being attacked because he just attacked Assad. He has to tell the American people what we're doing in Syria. He has not done that yet.
Well, I mean, his tweets before this, Syria is not our problem. This is in 2013. Stay out of Syria. Do not attack Syria. President Obama, do not attack Syria. To our foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, many very bad things will happen.
That's right. He should follow his own advice.
So you can see there Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat from California, saying that Donald Trump should follow his own advice in his old tweets, which has to do with that hypocrisy. But like I said, I thought that the response that Ted Lieu gave there to Bill Maher's original question is kind of your basic conspiracy theory logic, that anything that contradicts the conspiracy theory is just evidence of the cover-up. That's why Donald Trump is going against Putin, is just to distract us from the fact that he's actually a puppet of Putin. I don't really like that logic. I mean, what we really need is evidence, and what the only evidence we have right now is that for some reason Donald Trump has definitely flip-flopped on non-intervention in Syria. And you heard Bill Maher talk about it a little bit in the political comedy. Now I want to get to the real news clips. I'm going to start off with a story from NBC's Meet the Press. This is Chuck Todd with an introduction, trying to put it all in context in a way that I don't normally see in the corporate media, where he talks about how Donald Trump is the 7th consecutive president to engage in military action in the Middle East, which is, you know, when I get to the very last clip, I'm going to show you Bernie Sanders talking about our endless war, and there's definitely something to that, and I'm glad Chuck Todd at least starts off with that context. And then he also talks about the way Donald Trump is flip-flopping and how he may be losing the alt-right on this, and how it's scrambling political allegiances because he's getting all, you know, the neocons on the left and the, you know, hawks on the right are all coming together. You know, some people in from the Obama administration who were being constrained by Obama, who really wanted to attack Syria, are now like coming forth and praising President Trump for sending these 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles into Syria. And anyway, this is a little under 4 minutes from Meet the Press this morning. I will talk about it with you after we watch it together here.
7th consecutive American president to launch a military action against a country in the Middle East. Of course, the first one in that 7 consecutive streak was President Carter's failed mission to rescue the hostages in Iran in 1980, right up to Thursday's strike in Syria. The attack on a Syrian air base involving 60 cruise missiles launched from naval destroyers in the Mediterranean was what the Trump administration called a proportionate response to last week's chemical attack that killed more than 80 people and caused horrific suffering that was seen in pictures circulated around the globe. The attack scrambled political alliances, drawing praise from many usual Trump opponents, but criticism from some of his strongest supporters. The episode has raised all sorts of questions about the Trump administration. What is the president's ultimate goal in Syria? Was this mission accomplished or mission creep? What message is the administration sending to the world, to Russia, to China, to North Korea? And can Mr. Trump sell this to his nationalist base was deeply skeptical about taking any action in Syria. We have 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats here with us this morning and many different points of view. This isn't cut and dry, typical red versus blue. Ultimately, there's this question. Was this an impulsive decision by a president moved by human suffering or a fundamental change in his thinking about foreign intervention?
No child of God should ever suffer such horror.
The strikes on Syria are a startling reversal by a president who spent his campaign arguing that the U.S. should steer clear of the country's protracted civil war.
Now Hillary wants to start a shooting war in Syria in conflict with a nuclear-armed Russia, which could very well lead to World War III. If we did nothing, if we did absolutely nothing, we'd be in great shape.
Mr. Trump's decision to back away from an America First isolationist philosophy has supporters confused and even angry. Some blame it on the waning power of chief strategist Steve Bannon, who just days before the Syria strike was ejected from the National Security Council amid tensions with Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner.
Rubio's happy, Hillary's happy. Oh, yeah, the Weekly Standard people are. All the neoconservatives are happy.
The Syrian president's brutality is nothing new. In 2013, 8 days after Assad launched a chemical attack which killed more than 1,400 civilians, including hundreds of children, Trump tweeted, "What will we get for bombing Syria besides more debt and a possible long-term conflict? Obama needs congressional approval." But now, with the power of the presidency, Mr. Trump appears to have abandoned that point of view, at least for now. But what is his ultimate goal?
We are prepared to do more, but we hope that will not be necessary.
Just last week, Mr. Trump's Secretary of State backed away from the policy of regime change in Syria.
I think the status and the longer term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people.
But now, a week later,
with the acts that he has taken, it would seem that there would be no role for him to govern the Syrian people.
An American official says Russians on the ground were given notice that the missiles were coming. Flights from the base have already resumed, and Secretary Tillerson's trip to Moscow this week is still on. At home, most of Washington's foreign policy establishment is applauding the strikes.
The strikes were important. I think they were, the signal is as important as the actual damage that was done.
While a coalition of liberals and conservatives skeptical of intervention without approval from Congress oppose them.
Our heart breaks seeing those images. Say, what can we do? But it doesn't mean we just sort of rip up the Constitution and say, okay, it's fine to bomb anybody if they're committing atrocities.
Doing this without consulting Congress, without a vote, I think is a clear violation of law.
It's fair to
So I'm going to show several more clips in a few minutes about whether it's unconstitutional for Donald Trump to take military action without going to Congress. And I thought that NBC Meet the Press story was really good at putting context around what Donald Trump has done, putting it in the context of previous presidents, showing the way it's getting these differing reactions from not the usual suspects, scrambling political alliances. And I'm actually going to have a clip from the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, later talking about Steve Bannon no longer being a permanent member of the National Security Council, which is includes kind of a dig at Steve Bannon. That'll be in a little bit, but first I want to compare and contrast that NBC report, which I thought was quite good, with this shorter report from Kristin Fisher on Fox News Sunday, who I don't really know much about her, but some of the same facts. You'll see Kristin Fisher mentions that Syria is still taking action from, bombing action from the same base that was hit by these Tomahawk missiles, which isn't good for the Trump administration. But the Fox News report also, I think, plays up the threat from Russia and the Russia confrontation. And then at the end, there are a couple things where they talk about the decisiveness of Donald Trump, and there's this subtle dig against Obama for setting his red line and not following through. So I think there's definitely more bias in this 90-second report from Fox News Sunday than in that 4-minute report from NBC's Meet the Press. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section after we watch this. Actually, it's 95 seconds. Kristin, is her right? Kristin Fisher on Fox News Sunday over here.
Correspondent Kristin Fisher live from Palm Beach with the latest from the Southern White House. Kristin.
Chris, residents of the same Syrian town hit in that chemical weapons attack say warplanes have returned to bomb them, though this time without the deadly gas. And it has the world wondering how President Trump will respond. In a letter to Congress, he defended his decision to launch almost 60 Tomahawk missiles at a single Syrian airbase without congressional approval by saying, quote, "I acted in the vital national security and foreign policy interests of the United States pursuant to my constitutional authority." He then said that, quote, "The U.S. will take additional action as necessary and appropriate to further its important national interests." As the president mulls over what those additional actions might be, the Pentagon is investigating if Russia was involved in that chemical weapons attack. Senior military officials say a Russian drone was seen flying over the hospital where victims of the attack were taken. A few hours later, it was bombed. The Kremlin is denying any responsibility. Now Russia is flexing its muscles by sending a warship towards the 2 Navy destroyers that launched the strike on Syria. And all of this just days before Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is scheduled to take his first trip to Moscow. The State Department says Tillerson called his Russian counterpart yesterday, and the trip is still on. And he will be bringing a very powerful message with him, that President Trump is willing to take decisive military action anytime a country crosses his red line. Chris?
Kristin Fisher report.
So what do you think? Didn't that have the bias that I talked about? Much more bias than the NBC Meet the Press clip that I showed before that. I mean, a lot of the same facts were in there, but there was definitely more spin. I don't know if you noticed last week, Fox News put a copyright claim, a content ID claim against my video, and I couldn't monetize it for 2 days. It was actually blocked, and I uploaded an edited version. Now the unlisted live stream is actually available unmonetized. I don't know what's going to happen with this video, whether it's going to be unmonetized. I actually have to mention, I don't know if you've heard other YouTubers talk about the big drop in YouTube ad revenue. That's definitely something that's happened to me in the last several days. I've noticed a huge drop in YouTube ad revenue. I don't know if it's the result of this Wall Street Journal article that caused all these advertisers to pull ads from YouTube, but hopefully it's just temporary. But if you want to help me out, both from not getting my videos monetized, either from Fox News copyright claims, or I'm not sure if this video is going to be monetized just because I put Syria in the title. That's one of the things that is like controversial if it mentions even something in the Middle East. So if you want to help out, you can become one of my patrons on Patreon at a link down in the video description. But before I get to some more news clips, I did want to take one more little break here and show you a political comedy clip. The way that I didn't think Saturday Night Live on Weekend Update really got a handle on, you know, how to make fun of Donald Trump on the whole Syria issue. Maybe they didn't have enough time. It just happened in the last day or two of the Saturday Night Live work week. But I'm going to show sort of, there's a little bit of an edit in here between the jokes from Colin, Jost, and Michael Che. I cut out a Three Stooges clip. Actually, Michael Che did this one funny bit where he talked about how the whole thing was kind of a Three Stooges act because we're kind of bombing both sides in a way, and I cut that out because I was too afraid of the copyright claim on the Three Stooges clip. But here are a couple not so great jokes I thought from Weekend Update on Syria, which I will talk about after we watch that together here.
It turns out the only thing scarier than Donald Trump acting unpresidential is Donald Trump acting presidential. In response to the Syrian regime's chemical weapons attack, President Trump on Thursday sent 59 Tomahawk missiles to disable a Syrian airfield. Because when Donald Trump is angry, he always presses send. This is one of those moments where it seems extra jarring that Donald Trump is our president. Even if you're a Trump supporter, it's got to seem a little crazy that he's starting a real war with Assad while he's still bogged down in a Twitter war with Schwarzenegger.
Now, this attack comes as a surprise because just Monday, the president said he wanted nothing to do with the Syrian conflict. And by Thursday, he had already attacked them. He's handling conflict the way my mother handles family drama. At first, she's like, this ain't none of my business. Y'all better leave me out of this. Y'all grown. Then 3 days later, she's outside my ex-girlfriend's job in a tracksuit with a brick in one hand and her wig in the other. Trump also broke protocol by not waiting for Congress's approval. He didn't even wait till he was home. He was still on vacation in Margaritaville, or wherever he calls that place. And he just sent 60 missiles from Amazon Prime on a whim.
So those were the jokes. I didn't think they were so great, but if you want to see the better joke with the Three Stooges clip, there's a link down in the video description. I thought Saturday Night Live could have done better. By the way, I know there's some stream problems for the live show. I have been reading your live comments along the way. I did want to show one live comment. This is from a live viewer named Old Maryland, who said something, was making a couple comments with an argument I thought was going to come because of the news this week. Here it is. Basically incredulous about the news that Assad is using sarin gas and chemical weapons. You know, why would he do that? What's the evidence? And the truth is, we haven't seen the evidence. It's just the credibility of the U.S. government, which a lot of people have been skeptical of for a long time. And now that Donald Trump is the head of the U.S. government, that makes even more people skeptical. And the next clip I want to show is actually Chuck Todd talking to the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, asking when are we going to see this evidence, so that people like Old Maryland, who don't really believe that Assad used sarin gas, used chemical weapons, when are we going to see the evidence? And here's Nikki Haley talking about that to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning here.
Solution would include the Russians. Obviously, they don't accept the conclusion that the United States and others did, that this was Assad's regime that ordered this chemical weapons attack. Do you plan to present the evidence publicly, and do you plan to do it at the United Nations? Where is the evidence going to be presented?
You know, the interesting thing, Chuck, is when this chemical weapons murder happened to so many people, Russia's reaction was not, oh, how horrible, or how could they do this to innocent children, or how awful is that? Their initial reaction was, Assad didn't do it. The Syrian government didn't do it. Why were they that defensive that quick? The idea of the casualties came after. The first priority for them was to cover for Assad. And so what we knew from intelligence, that the Syrian regime had done this again, as they had done so many times before. We had the evidence that they had done it. It's obviously classified, so certainly I'm not the one that would release that information, but it was enough that the president knew.
But there's no plans on presenting the evidence public? I mean, if you look, isn't it important in order to isolate Russia, to publicly show how wrong they are about this?
So I don't doubt that that information won't come out. I think that you're also seeing the investigations of Russia now. That information is going to come out when they can declassify it. So I fully expect that the proper directors will come out with that information. But for right now, all we needed to know in that room was, is it true? Mm-hmm. Did it happen? What's the evidence? And go with that. And what you saw was, we watched the president in what I believe was his finest hour since he's taken office, because he was very thoughtful about it. He talked about risk. What General Mattis and the military did was just a rock star performance, because they were so focused on making sure there were limited civilian casualties, if any at all. They were focused on making sure they hit the air base where the Syrian government actually used the planes to carry the chemical weapons. And they were focused on making sure that they understood the United States is not going to allow chemical weapons use ever.
If Assad doesn't use
So you saw there from Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, that we haven't released the actual evidence that Assad is behind the chemical weapons, but there is evidence, if you believe Nikki Haley and the Trump administration, and if you don't believe them, then Nikki Haley has said at some point in the future that this will be declassified. I think Chuck Todd was thinking sort of like a Cuban Missile Crisis moment where you have was it Adlai Stevenson was the UN ambassador at that time, who like gave this whole presentation to the United Nations about Russia putting, or the Soviet Union putting nuclear weapons in Cuba, and maybe there's going to be a United Nations moment, but hopefully it won't be more like the Colin Powell moment before the Iraq War with the vial of the white powder. That's, I think actually there's been a Russian spokesperson who said something about the whole Russia or the whole Assad culpability being akin to Colin Powell's speech at the UN. So we'll have to wait and see if there is any evidence. But the other big controversy that I'm going to show several clips around is whether the United States under the Trump administration has a policy of regime change in Syria. Do they want Assad to go? And that's something, you know, Russia wants Assad to stay, and so that would be a really anti-Russia policy. And Nikki Haley gave the strongest statement against Assad in this clip I'm about to show, from talking to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union. I think that's where this is from, right? Right. And she says, no, but there's also no future in Syria with Assad for the Syrian government if Assad is going to be the leader. So they're not calling for regime change. It's just they don't think he's going to be the head of the regime based on everything they know. They think it's basically impossible for him to remain the head of Syria, but that doesn't mean they're for regime change, which I don't know if you can like square that circle, but let's watch that clip of Nikki Haley on CNN's State of the Union talking to Jake Tapper over here.
State Rex Tillerson said there is, quote, no role for Assad in governing Syria. Take a listen.
Assad's role in the future is uncertain, clearly, and with the acts that he has taken, it would seem that there would be no role for him to govern the Syrian people.
So 10 days ago, you said that getting Assad out of Syria would no longer be a priority for the United States. Obviously, since then was the chemical weapons attack. But I'm trying to figure out, is regime change in Syria now the official policy of the United States?
So there's multiple priorities. Getting Assad out is not the only priority. And so what we're trying to do is obviously defeat ISIS. Secondly, we don't see a peaceful Syria with Assad in there. Thirdly, get the Iranian influence out. And then finally move towards a political solution, because at the end of the day, this is a complicated situation. There are no easy answers, and a political solution is going to have to happen. But we know that it is not going to be, there's not any sort of option where a political solution is going to happen with Assad at the head of the regime. It just, if you look at his actions, if you look at the situation, it's going to be hard to see a government that's peaceful and stable with Assad.
Well, of course it's hard to, but is the position of the Trump administration that he cannot be ruler of Syria anymore? Regime change is the policy.
Well, the regime change is something that we think is going to happen because all of the parties are going to see that Assad's not the leader that needs to be taking place for Syria. So what I think you're seeing is this isn't about policy or not. This is about thoughts. And so when you look at the thoughts, there is no political solution that any of us can see with Assad at the lead. And so I don't think that that's something for the United States to decide. That's something the entire international community has decided, that it's going to be hard pressed to see Assad in that leadership role. And so you're going to see the president's going to very much watch this. We are all going to keep calling out the international community and asking them to push for a political solution. We're going to continue to call out bad actors when they do something like this. And you're going to see this administration act when they think it's appropriate.
You've talked about
So I don't know, could you follow all that, where Nikki Haley is saying she doesn't believe in regime change? That's not the policy of the Trump administration. There's just no future for Syria with Assad, the Assad regime in control. I don't know, that's a really fine distinction, and you'll see the interesting follow-up on CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper reported that there was, by the time he got to the second half of the program, a Russian spokesperson had actually responded to what Nikki Haley said and called it a big betrayal, and because Russia doesn't want regime change. They want their big client, Bashar al-Assad, to stay in power. And after Jake Tapper does that intro, he goes over to this Democratic senator, I think from Massachusetts, Senator Ed Markey, and says, well, what do you think about Nikki Haley being for regime change, even though she didn't say regime change? And you'll see Ed Markey says almost the same thing that Nikki Haley said, but because he's the Democrat and she's the Republican, he has to attack Nikki Haley, even though he's completely agreeing that, you know, there's going to be a political solution where the Syrian people are going to decide, which is kind of what Nikki Haley said, but because Jake Tapper sort of like stokes the partisan conflict by claiming Nikki Haley's for regime change, they're like agreeing, but also there's a big attack, which I will talk about with you after we watch. This goes on for like 4.5 minutes over in this clip.
In reaction from Moscow to the interview you just saw with UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, Russian Senator Konstantin Kosachev, chair of the International Affairs Committee, called Nikki Haley's comments calling for regime change in Syria sabotage. On Facebook, he writes, quote, calling a spade, this is a direct sabotage of the international community's efforts to start a process of political negotiations between the authorities and the opposition. That reaction is perhaps a preview of what will be waiting for Secretary of State Rex Tillerson when he arrives in Moscow this week. I'm joined now by Democratic Senator Ed Markey, who serves on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for being here.
No, thank you. Good to see you.
So you heard the reaction from Moscow. Do you think the Trump administration might be making a mistake by saying there is no solution with Assad in power?
Well, when the Trump administration uses the words regime change, they're talking about a military effort to remove Assad. And that would mean putting American young men and women on the ground in battlefield conditions in order to accomplish that goal. So that would require ultimately a congressional approval, because that would be a step of incredible magnitude that would be breaking with the policy that we've had thus far.
Well, you're saying that by Nikki Haley saying that they don't see any sort of political solution where Assad is in charge, that they are essentially saying they will push for regime change, and you think that that would mean more ground troops, U.S. ground troops, because there are a few hundred in there right now.
Absolutely. That's what regime change means. It means doing in Syria what we did in Iraq in removing Saddam Hussein. I don't think there's any appetite in the United States for a massive additional military presence with young men and women actually in combat situations being introduced. Instead, what the Trump administration should be talking about is massive, crippling sanctions on the Russian company that is the principal arms supporter for Syria, and any other company or country in the world that does business with that company, Baron. That's where it should begin. And then the discussion should go to, one, that the Russians honor their commitment to remove all chemical weapons from Syria. They have not done that yet. Secondly, that they implement the ceasefire that they negotiated with Iran and Turkey inside of Syria. That has not been honored. That there be an agreement that humanitarian aid can be distributed throughout Syria. That has not actually been honored. And finally, that they go to the negotiating table and they try to find a political resolution with Assad, with all other parties at the table.
With Assad, so he needs to be part of the negotiation, you think?
In order to find an ultimate negotiated settlement, we must negotiate with the Syrian government, and the only way we can do that is if all parties, including the opposition, are at the table, and that Russia and the United States are enforcing this goal of ensuring that that negotiated settlement result in a government that all parties can live with.
I have not heard anybody from the Trump administration talk about calling for massive amounts of troops in Syria, but let me just ask you.
But that's what regime change means. There's no other way it can be accomplished.
But do you think that there is a possible future for Syria with Assad in charge? Because what Nikki Haley was saying, what Ambassador Haley was saying, is she doesn't envision one.
Well, again, that's where we have to wind up. But we have to go through a process by which we are tightening the noose around the Russian company, Baron, and anyone else that does business with it that is making it possible for Assad to stay in power. That's what we did in Iran by crippling their oil industry. Now we must do the same thing with Russia and anyone else that is providing arms to Russia. And then at the end of the day, obviously our goal would be to make sure that Assad is removed, but we cannot do it by saying regime change, because that's just a code for military intervention at a massive level by the United States.
Let's talk about the military strike.
So, like I said before I showed the clip, Senator Ed Markey's criticism of Nikki Haley was kind of manufactured by Jake Tapper's framing of the issue there, that she was for regime change, and then he extended that to, that means military intervention, although that part might actually be correct. And you notice Jake Tapper waited till like the last 45 seconds of that over 4-minute clip to finally say, well, you know, Nikki Haley didn't really say regime change. And Ed Markey and Nikki Haley kind of more agreed than disagreed on this whole political solution and bringing the Syrian government, which is the Assad government, to the negotiating table as the real solution. And you'll see that's actually what the Secretary of State for the Trump administration, Rex Tillerson, said in multiple, he did 2 different interviews. You may remember last week I showed Martha Raddatz over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos when Nikki Haley came on the program saying she was the highest ranking person of the core foreign policy team in the Trump administration to come on the Sunday morning shows, which was, I thought, kind of a dig at Rex Tillerson for not going on the shows. Well, he went on 2 shows this morning, both on CBS's Face the Nation and then on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. The first clip I want to show is from Face the Nation, where he's, I don't know, it's kind of a nuanced difference from what Nikki Haley said about whether Assad had to go. It's closer to what Ed Markey said, where he's talking about how Assad and the Assad government is part of the diplomatic solution. And you'll notice in this clip here, this is, like I said, from talking to John Dickerson on CBS's Face the Nation, he does say that the Syrian people have to decide, and that's the political solution. But he's also kind of talking about what if you watched the debates of the Republicans, there was sort of this, and even between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the general election, there was kind of a split between getting rid of Assad and getting rid of ISIS at the same time, or whether you needed to get rid of ISIS first and then get rid of Assad. And Rex Tillerson is actually in the second camp, more so, I don't know, there's sort of a nuanced difference between what Rex Tillerson says here on Face the Nation, between what he says and what Nikki Haley said, which I will discuss after we watch this clip together over here.
U.S. policy to get him out of power.
Our priority in Syria, John, really hasn't changed. I think the president's been quite clear. First and foremost, we must defeat ISIS. And I would say that the military progress, both in Syria and in Iraq, has been remarkable since President Trump's inauguration. We have continued to liberate areas. We are making tremendous progress in liberating Mosul in Iraq, working with coalition forces, working with allies, and we're moving to position to liberate Raqqa and to continue to contain ISIS and the threat that ISIS really does present to the homeland and to other homelands of allies around the world.
So in terms of President Assad, you had said that there has been no change in policy as a result of this attack. So it is still true then that his fate is to be determined, as you said previously, by the Syrian people?
Yes, John, I think, you know, obviously the United States' own founding principles are self-determination. And I think what the United States and our allies want to do is to enable the Syrian people to make that determination. Now, we've seen what violent regime change looks like in Libya and the kind of chaos that can be unleashed, and indeed the kind of misery that it enacts on its own people. I think what we're hopeful is through this Syrian process, working with coalition members, working with the UN, and in particular working through the Geneva process, that we can navigate a political outcome in which the Syrian people, in fact, will determine Bashar al-Assad's fate and his legitimacy.
The problem.
And I think the question of how his criminal actions are dealt with is something that will be part of that process.
The argument that people make for more intervention by the United States is that the Syrian people are in no position to make a determination about the president because he's bombing a lot of them. Millions of them have had to flee the country, and that he's created a condition where there is no institution that can remove him from power. And while the U.S. pursues its interests, he continues to do all of the things that the administration has now said are so morally reprehensible.
Well, I think, John, it's important that we keep our priorities straight, and we believe that the first priority is the defeat of ISIS, that by defeating ISIS and removing their caliphate from their control, we have now eliminated at least or minimized a particular threat, not just to the United States, but to the whole stability in the region. And once the ISIS threat has been reduced or eliminated, I think we can turn our attention directly to stabilizing the situation in Syria. We're hopeful that we can prevent a continuation of the civil war and that we can bring the parties to the table to begin the process of political discussions. Clearly, that requires the participation of the regime and with the support of their allies, and we're hopeful that Russia will choose to play a constructive role in supporting ceasefires through their own Astana talks, but also ultimately through Geneva. And if we can achieve ceasefires in zones of stabilization in Syria, then I believe we hope we will have the conditions to begin a useful political process.
This was the first.
So what do you think? That's the third time I've listened to that Rex Tillerson clip, and I listened to that Nikki Haley clip 3 times. And at first it seems like there was some kind of split between the two of them, but by the end, I think that they're actually really describing the same policy, just emphasizing different parts of it in different ways, and they're both avoiding the idea of regime change as a policy goal of the Trump administration. I just think Nikki Haley has sort of a stronger version of there's no future with Assad, while Rex Tillerson is emphasizing more the process by which the people of Syria get rid of Assad, but he's not quite as firm on Assad not fitting into the future. So I guess if there's any difference, maybe that's the difference. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I want to show a question that Rex Tillerson was asked both on CBS's Face the Nation, but I took a clip earlier from This Week with George Stephanopoulos where he was asked twice, and he didn't actually react as negatively in this case because there was no quote. I think it was Marco Rubio on CBS's Face the Nation who was quoted as saying that Rex Tillerson's statement that Assad might be able to stay, or that it wasn't the goal of U.S. foreign policy to get rid of Assad, that might have emboldened him to engage in this chemical attack. But I think there's also a problem with Rex Tillerson's response, both on Face the Nation and the same thing he did over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's a little over 90 seconds, the clip. I'll explain to you the problem with his defense over after we watch the clip together here.
1 second. A couple more questions first, directly on Syria. You mentioned again that the outcome of the political process will be that the Syrian people can decide the fate of Assad. When you said that first last week on March 30th in your meeting with the Turkish president, are you worried at all that that was taken as a green light by Assad to launch that chemical attack?
George, I don't see how that could be the case. You know, this is not the first chemical attack launched by Assad. In fact, there were 2 other chemical attacks the week of March 25th and the 30th, and there have been chemical weapons attacks made by the Bashar al-Assad regime in the past. So this was just the latest in a series of violations.
But you accept that right now the Syrian people have no way to remove Assad. That's going to take greater pressure from the United States, from international coalition, perhaps military pressure.
Well, ultimately it could, George, but you know, we've seen what that looks like when you undertake a violent regime change in Libya. And the situation in Libya continues to be very chaotic, and I would argue that the life of the Libyan people is not all that well off today. So I think we have to learn the lessons of the past and learn the lessons of what went wrong in Libya when you choose that pathway of regime change. So we know this is going to be hard work, but we think it's also a process that will lead to a durable and lasting stability inside of Syria. Anytime you go in and have a violent change at the top, it is very difficult to create the conditions for stability longer term.
So it sounds like from what you're saying right now, there is...
Now, I guess Rex Tillerson is defending himself there, not quite as emotionally as he did on Face the Nation, but saying that he couldn't have been the trigger for Assad using chemical weapons because he'd already used chemical weapons. But then that kind of undermines what you saw Trump saying in the initial news reports that I showed from NBC, or the initial news report from NBC where he was so firm, you know, I have all these red lines, and when they cross my red lines, I'm going to respond. And that was also in the Fox News report from Kristin Fisher, that somehow Trump is so strong compared to Obama. But if Rex Tillerson is right, and this is like the third chemical attack, then, you know, where has Trump been for the last two? Although I think this is supposedly a sarin gas attack, which is not quite the same. The other ones, were they chlorine gas? Or I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section, or if you have any input or any facts or links to facts, you can let me know. But I want to show one more clip from Rex Tillerson. This is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. In this clip, he's actually talking about his upcoming trip to Russia. And I'm going to show a clip from Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, who's become kind of a star on the Democratic side, pushing this whole Russia conspiracy with the Trump campaign, collusion theory. And Adam Schiff has said that Rex Tillerson has to be tough on Russia, and in his trip to Russia has to say, you know, has to have an ultimatum that, you know, Russia has to fulfill its obligations that it made with the the Obama administration, that it would get rid of the chemical weapons in Syria in exchange for the U.S. not going in and having a greater military presence. And here you'll see Rex Tillerson agrees with that and says he's actually going to give that ultimatum to Russia. And I will talk about that with you after we watch that clip together here.
Russia hasn't done enough to get rid of that chemical stockpile because it's still there, and the Russians are still on that base. One of our next guests, Congressman Adam Schiff, has said you should deliver an ultimatum to Foreign Minister Lavrov when you meet with him next week on this issue. Will you do that?
Well, we've already, I think, issued some very strong statements, George, and yes, that will be part of the discussions when I visit Moscow next week, is to call upon Foreign Minister Lavrov and the Russian government to fulfill the obligation it made to the international community when it agreed to be the guarantor of the elimination of the chemical weapons. And why Russia has not been able to achieve that is unclear to me. I don't draw conclusions of complicity at all, but clearly they've been incompetent, and perhaps they've just simply been outmaneuvered by the Syrians.
Do you think this is an opportunity, or are you hoping this is an opportunity perhaps to drive a wedge between Assad and Putin, to drive Putin into a commitment right now to do more to remove Assad?
Well, George, I'm hopeful that we can have constructive talks with the Russian government, with Foreign Minister Lavrov, and have Russia be supportive of a process that will lead to a stable Syria. Clearly, they are Bashar al-Assad's current ally. They should have the greatest influence on Bashar al-Assad, and certainly his decisions to use chemical weapons, they should have the greatest influence on him to cause him to no longer use those. I hope that Russia is thinking carefully about its continued alliance with Bashar al-Assad, because every time one of these horrific attacks occurs, it draws Russia closer into some level of responsibility.
And if we determine they are responsible, what will happen?
Well, that is going to be clearly very damaging to U.S.-Russian relations. I do not believe that the Russians want to have worsening relationships with the U.S., but it's going to take a lot of discussion and a lot of dialogue to better understand what is the relationship that Russia wishes to have with the U.S.
Well, one of the big issues,
Sorry, I had a little transition problem there, but So there you see that the Secretary of State from the Trump administration, Rex Tillerson, is going to take this ultimatum to Russia when he goes to Russia this week, and it was suggested by Democrat Adam Schiff that he say that Russia, it's your responsibility to control these chemical weapons, and you see he even went further and said that Russia is either complicit in these chemical weapons attacks, because apparently there were Russian military troops at this air base where these chemical weapons were coming from, and so Russia is either complicit or they're incompetent, and that's kind of what do you call it, a Hobson's choice, quite a dilemma for the Russians. And I mean, that's actually a fairly good argument that Rex Tillerson is taking to Russia, and we'll see what comes out of those talks, if they even let us know what's happening with Rex Tillerson's talk with Lavrov, his counterpart in Russia, when he goes to visit there. But I want to show a clip of Adam Schiff responding to what you just saw Rex Tillerson say, also on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and he also agrees with Rex Tillerson said yes, he's going to accept the ultimatum, and you'll see Adam Schiff explain why he thinks that the United States should deliver this ultimatum to Russia. And then he also talks about his views on whether Congress needs to authorize military force like what Trump did with the Tomahawk missiles. And that's actually the next subject I'm going to get to. And I have one more clip from the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, on Steve Bannon no longer being on a permanent member of the National Security Council, which is more about the whole Russia thing than the authorization of military force. But so there's sort of a mess up in the order here, or they bleed into each other. But here's Adam Schiff both talking about the ultimatum to Russia, and then why he thinks that why he's been consistent on Libya and on Syria, and now on Trump's actions in Syria, why they require authorization from Congress, which will be the next subject I cover after you watch Adam Schiff talk about it to George Stephanopoulos this morning.
Secretary Tillerson, I posed the question. You said he should deliver an ultimatum to the foreign minister of Russia when he meets with him Tuesday. Is that what you heard this morning?
Well, it does sound like it's what I heard, although I was suggesting that, frankly, before the strike, not after it. But nonetheless, I think there's a strong moral case to make for what the president did. Stronger now, in fact, than when President Obama faced that same situation, because when President Obama did, and I think the use of military force always has to be the last response, not the first, he was presented with a diplomatic alternative that the Russians put on the table. And I think you exhaust all those diplomatic alternatives. That ultimately didn't work. The Russians didn't sufficiently enforce it. Assad violated that agreement, and I think that makes the moral justification, the answer to that Syrian father's question, how can the world allow this to go on, that much stronger today than it was in 2013. But I don't think, George, it should have been done without congressional approval. I don't think, frankly, Obama should have put troops back in Iraq or in Syria without congressional approval. I don't think this president should have taken that strike without congressional approval. I also think that...
Doesn't he have the inherent right under the Constitution to do that?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, you can certainly argue, and President Obama did, that if this is limited, if it's not full warfare, that he has the Article II power to do that. I also think, frankly, that Congress has itself to blame here. We've sat on our hands for years. I've introduced an authorization to use force. I couldn't get a single vote on it. No one could. And so we have weakened our own role in the checks and balances. I think Congress needs to step forward immediately.
But do you think Congress could even come close to agreeing on a use of force resolution at this point?
I do, and I always have, and I have for years. It's certainly not easy, and what I propose that we do, because there are certain Republican red lines and Democratic red lines, we're not going to allow a resolution that doesn't have a sunset. We've seen the problem with one that has gone on indefinitely now. The Republicans don't want to see one that limits the president's hands geographically. I think we can come to agreement on a resolution that says the president will have the authority to go after al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Taliban. But if he should use this authorization, it will trigger a opportunity for any member of Congress to force a vote. to either repeal the authorization or revise it in some way. That kind of formula, I think, might make sense to both Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, because it forces accountability.
You also heard Secretary Tillerson.
So at the end there, you heard Adam Schiff give this whole grand compromise idea of how Republicans and Democrats could come together on an authorization for use of military force that would go beyond what Trump is using now, which is borderline unconstitutional. And like I said, I'm going to discuss that with the last 4 clips I show at the end. But before I get to those last 4 clips, the one more clip I want to show on the whole Russia topic that Adam Schiff was talking about at the beginning, where he suggested this ultimatum, this whole flip-flop in the Trump administration on the Russia topic may possibly be the result of a shakeup in the Trump administration, where Steve Bannon, the alt-right, white supremacist, Breitbart editor, or whatever you want to call him, he is on his way out, and the more, neocon, more mainstream Jared Kushner, Reince Priebus wing is gaining ascendancy, and that may be why Trump is willing to attack Syria, or I don't know. But this is the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, who did an extensive interview just on Fox News Sunday, and I only took one clip. He also talked about whether removing Assad was a priority for U.S. policy, and kind of came in between what Rex Tillerson said and what Nikki Haley said. I didn't take that clip, but I thought you might like to see this clip where he talked about Steve Bannon no longer being a permanent member of the National Security Council, and he didn't really say anything negative about Steve Bannon, but there's this subtle dig where, the permanent members are those people who have the long-term interests of the American people at heart, which, that's not what Steve Bannon is, what he cares about. But, the president can talk to whoever he wants and get advice. It's just these permanent members, they're like the people who really care about what the long-term interests of the American people, not Steve Bannon, over in this clip.
You've got China, you've got Syria, you've got Russia, but a lot of people in Washington are talking about relations inside the White House. Welcome to the D.C. politics, General McMaster. Why did you push for Steve Bannon to be taken off the Principals Committee of the National Security Council?
Well, this is not as significant as it appears, I think. But I think what the president was doing was making clear that he is going to, in terms of permanent membership of the National Security Council, have those permanent members who are there for every meeting, every official meeting of the National Security Council, to be those who will give him their advice on the long-term interests of the American people. And so, really, though, it depends. The president can get advice from anybody he wants, and he does that. He asks a broad range of people who he trusts, and Steve Bannon's one of them, about policy decisions and about the risks and opportunities involved with each of these. And so that none of that has changed.
But do you think it was inappropriate to have a political advisor in that role?
Well, no, I think what is appropriate is to have in that role whoever the president wants in that role, and Steve Bannon provides the president with advice on a broad range of issues, and will continue to do so.
General McMaster, thank you. We covered a long range of issues today. Thank you for your time, sir, and we'll follow what happens next.
So, yeah, that was the very end of a very extensive interview. You can see the entire Fox News program on Hulu, apparently, is the only place you can see the whole episode. But I thought that was... What do you think? Did he dodge the question, or did he actually answer the question with a subtle dig at Steve Bannon by saying, well, the permanent members, like I said before I showed the clip, that's for people who have the long-term interest of the American people in mind, and political people like Steve Bannon, they have some other interest in mind, and that's why it sounds like H.R. McMaster has taken over the National Security Council from the alt-right conservatives. Is that what we're supposed to believe? I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. So, like I said, these last 4 clips are all pretty much on the topic. Well, the Bernie Sanders clip at the end goes a little further as to why Democrats should just be completely opposed to the endless war in the Middle East that's been going on. But The main topic of these last 4 clips is whether Congress needs to authorize this kind of use of force. And I just showed, in the clip before last, I showed Tim Kaine talk about why he thought that he was being consistent to say that Congress needed to authorize it. I'm going to show 2 fairly complementary views from a Republican and a Democrat who were over on Fox News Sunday. This is John Cornyn from Texas and Ben Cardin, I can't remember what state he's from, but 2 senators talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning about whether Congress needs to authorize this type of force, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
That because while most senators, including the 2 of you, I think, supported this particular strike under these specific circumstances, there was concern from both sides of the aisle about whether, if President Trump gets more deeply involved, whether or not he needs authorization from Congress to do so. Here was Democratic leader Chuck Schumer this week.
It is now, however, incumbent on the Trump administration to come up with a coherent strategy and consult with Congress before implementing it.
Senator Cornyn, is Schumer right? Does the White House need approval from Congress if it's going to get more deeply involved in Syria?
Well, under the War Resolutions Act, which the President sent a letter pursuant to that act yesterday explaining his actions, it is required, and I think it also makes good sense. Before we commit our military and our men and women in uniform to any sort of conflict, they deserve the support of Congress on a bipartisan basis, as well as the support of the American people. So that's why that sort of consultation and advice is so important.
Senator Cardin, let me pick up on this with you, because President Obama and now President Trump both authorized widespread use of force across the Middle East based on an approval that was given by Congress right after 9/11. This is 15 years later. Does that cover moving against the Assad regime, or does the president need new approval? And an important question, because as we remember, when President Obama went to Congress back in 2013 to enforce the red line, it was clear Congress wasn't going to approve it. Do you think if the president went to Congress now that Democrats, Republicans would pass resolutions supporting the use of force to depose Bashar Assad?
Chris, you've asked a couple questions. First, in regards to the 2001 authorization, it's been interpreted by the Obama administration, I assume also the Trump administration, to cover the use of force against ISIS in Syria. Many of us disagree with that and believe Congress should pass a separate resolution dealing with ISIS, that we shouldn't be using the 9/11 resolution for that purpose. In regards to going against Assad's Syria, there is no congressional authorizations, so there is no authority to use force. The president has some inherent Article 2 powers, but as he consulted with us by notice on this attack, it's incumbent upon him to consult with Congress, and if there's going to be a use of force on a continuing basis, he needs the authorization of Congress.
And do you think the House and Senate, Democrats?
So there you saw both the Democrat and the Republican say that Congress does have some role here. Senator John Cornyn from Texas, he referred to the War Powers Act as the War Resolutions Act, so he should at least know that, no president has ever accepted the constitutionality of the War Powers Act, which basically says that Congress, that when the president takes this kind of military action, he has to report to Congress and has to finish it up within 60 days or get authorization from Congress or get an extension or tell Congress why he's not getting his 60 days or getting authorization within 60 days. And no court has ever really ruled on the constitutionality of that. It's a little bit suspect as to whether the War Powers Act is constitutional. The whole thing about the Constitution is it's a checks and balance system, between the 3 branches. And by the way, earlier I referred to Adam Schiff as Tim Kaine. I'm going to show a clip from Tim Kaine coming up and talking about his consistency on Libya and other things. Adam Schiff also said that there needed to be an authorization of the use of military force. I mean, it's a little bit bizarre to claim that the 2001 authorization for use of military force against al-Qaeda and those forces that attacked us on September 11th, that still authorizes use of force against Assad in Syria, although ISIS is like an offshoot of al-Qaeda. It was like al-Qaeda in Iraq, which became ISIS, but it's not. Now it's at war with ISIS, and ISIS and al-Qaeda are kind of at war, so I don't know if that really fits, but that's the authorization for use of military force from after September 11th that they're still using to go after Assad, who doesn't really fit at all. So I agree in that sense, but Lindsey Graham, the Republican, who's a big hawk, he doesn't even want an authorization for use of military force because, like Adam Schiff said in that earlier clip, there are some Republicans who think it's too limiting, and he actually has the most expansive view of both the power of the president to engage in military action, and also he has a really expansive view of the kind of military action he wants in Syria, which I will talk about with you after we watch that clip. This is Lindsey Graham over on NBC's Meet the Press, also not actually using profanity in terms of what he thinks about Assad using the same air base that was just struck to, again, bomb civilians, although not using chemical weapons. He says it's a big FU from Assad to Trump, which really amuses Chuck Todd by the end of the clip we'll watch together, and I'll talk about after we watch together over here.
These resolutions are limitations on using force, not authorizations to use force. So I don't intend to vote for anything that limits our ability to win the war against ISIL or replace Assad.
So you think that Syria, a sovereign country that is not mentioned at all in the current war authorization, it is somehow you can send troops into that sovereign nation without having to have Congress grant the president more authority there? I think you're in the minority view on that. Don't you think, Senator?
No, we already got troops on the ground. I don't see anybody saying cut off funding. If you don't like the 1,000 American troops that are helping to destroy ISIL, cut off funding. Be consistent here. I want more American troops, 5,000 or 6,000 like we have in Iraq, to help destroy ISIL. That means it will accelerate the demise of ISIL. I want to train opposition forces to take Assad down. He's a threat to the United States because he's a proxy of Iran. He used chemical weapons. He violated a treaty that he signed. I think it's up to us to enforce that treaty. We're on sound legal footing here, but our strategy is not yet developed. What comes next? I'm glad Trump did this. He is no longer Obama in the eyes of our enemies, but he needs to do more to close the deal. There's a new sheriff in town.
Do you think there's a moral difference between the use of chemical weapons and barrel bombs?
No, there's a legal difference, not a moral difference. If you're a mother, your baby is dead. But we do have treaties that we've signed all over the world saying we're not going to let one nation use weapons of mass destruction. That's what the Chemical Weapons Treaty is all about. But I will say this. If you kill babies with conventional bombs, it's still a moral outrage. Here's what I think Assad's telling Trump by flying from this base. F you. And I think he's making a serious mistake. Because if you're an adversary of the United States, and you don't worry about what Trump may do on any given day, then you're crazy.
I have to say, you used the initials, but I think that's a first for Meet the Press, Senator Graham. You even got, we had a few people watching, it raised a lot of eyebrows. I got to ask you this about the president's change of...
Raised a lot of eyebrows. The FU from Senator Lindsey Graham, who always likes to come up with something provocative when he's on the Sunday morning shows. And he does have, I mean, if you look at from a lawyer's perspective, what it is that Congress has the power to do in terms of the president taking military action, what he's saying about how all Congress can really do is vote to cut off funds. If they don't like what the president's doing with military action, they can pass a resolution to cut off funds. And there actually was a court case back from the Bill Clinton administration when he was bombing Serbia over the invasion of Kosovo. You remember Milosevic and all that stuff back from the 1990s. Well, he didn't quite get Congress to authorize that use of force, but they also did not. There was a vote to try to cut off funds that also failed, and so he just kept going with the military action. And that's this whole thing about the Constitution. The judicial branch decided, well, if Congress didn't go so far as to cut off funds, we're not getting involved in this conflict between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And that's basically, you can't sue the president for undertaking military action without authorization from Congress, unless, members of Congress can't sue anyway, unless Congress has gone so far as to vote to cut off the use of funds. Then maybe you could go ahead and the courts would enforce that type of like anti-war resolution. But otherwise, that's what the courts say so far, that it's not so much that Congress has to authorize the use of military force by the president. It's Congress has the power of the purse to cut off funds, and then they could come to the courts and get the president, stop the president from engaging in military action where Congress had cut off all funds. But I want to show two more quick clips of Democrats. The first one is Tim Kaine, who I kind of confused this clip with the Adam Schiff clip earlier. They have sort of similar arguments about why Congress has to authorize the use of military force. And I don't know, in a sense, when I heard this clip from Tim Kaine, he sounds like he's positioning himself to be the Democratic nominee to run against Donald Trump in 2020 by, being, reasonable and showing that he's consistent, but also, that he cares about national security. And I will talk about that a little more after you watch that second to last clip for the program tonight over here.
Virtually any nation in the world, the idea of the drafters of our Constitution was that you had to put a check against an executive gone wild. We don't have a system where the president just gets to launch missiles against anybody they want to, and they haven't presented a plan to Congress and asked for our approval. That's what they've got to do.
But, Senator, in this case, it's very limited, number one. And number two, there were American interests on the ground. We have U.S. soldiers, special operation forces that are on the ground, very close to chemical weapons. If you're saying this action was illegal, then you must be thinking that the Libya action by President Obama was illegal. Grenada by President Reagan, that was illegal. Are you saying all of those actions were illegal?
Chuck, I was a Senate candidate in 2011 when President Obama joined military action against Libya for humanitarian purposes. And I said then, I agreed with the Republicans in the House that rebuked President Obama and said he had exceeded his authority because the U.S. was not under imminent threat. That's the only circumstance where a commander-in-chief can use Article 2 power without going to Congress if there's an imminent threat to the United States. And you just heard Lindsey Graham say that wasn't the case, and President Trump did not say the U.S. was under imminent threat. We had a briefing by the White House on Friday. They still presented us with no plan. We don't know if it's limited or whether there's more. And when we asked about the legal authorization, they said they weren't prepared to discuss that, but they hope to discuss it in the coming days. Again, our system is we don't want a president, any president, just being able to start a war or launch missiles whenever they want. There's got to be congressional approval.
You heard Senator Graham, and he outlined what he would like to see, what actions are taken going forward, and he described sending maybe 5,000 troops, and I asked him, okay, do you need congressional authorization for that? He says no. Let me ask you this question. If an authorization is on the floor of the Senate that describes what Senator Graham wants to do, sending in a limited number of troops to basically push the momentum back against Assad again, would you support something like that?
You know, Lindsey and I agree that these atrocities are horrible, but here's where we part company. He stated very plainly, great, the Trump administration is for regime change. I don't think the U.S. policy toward any nation should be, we get to change out your leaders. If Assad's doing things wrong, violating international treaties with an authorization, we can try to deter him from doing it. We can prosecute him for war crimes. But I don't think the policy of the U.S. should be, we're going to change the regime of your leadership. That's for Syrians to decide. We should be part of a political process. But I don't think regime change should be official U.S. policy.
Do you think Assad will go under any circumstance that isn't military?
I agree with Ambassador Haley that I don't think there's any political solution to the civil war in Syria that doesn't mean that Assad moves aside, because he's tearing up the country. But instead of regime change, what we should focus on is humanitarian relief. In February of 2014, the UN Security Council said we should be delivering humanitarian aid to Syrians. If we had started doing that then, many fewer would have left the country. That's what we should do. But neither regime change nor a full-on unauthorized war against Syria is what we should be doing.
All right, Senator Tim Kaine, I'm going to leave.
So that's Senator Tim Kaine kind of agreeing with the Trump administration's ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, about the whole regime change idea, or at least the idea of there being no future for Syria with Assad at the head of Syria, which that's kind of strange that the left and the right come together there. But another place where the left and the right kind of come together is this next and final clip I want to show you is Senator Bernie Sanders, who talks a little bit about his opposition to this use of force by Trump, but also puts it in the larger, if Tim Kaine is running for president as he wants to be the Democratic nominee in 2020, he should listen to what Bernie Sanders says in this next clip, really talking about the endless war, Afghanistan and Iraq, and everything going on in the Middle East, and how it's the U.S. has to get out of this endless war, and how it's draining our resources. And this is, of all the arguments against what Trump did and what Trump seems to be about to do in Syria, I definitely wanted to make sure you saw this as the final clip for the program tonight over here.
Bernie Sanders, who has a little bit of a dimmer view on the strike against Syria. Senator Sanders joins me now from Burlington, Vermont. Welcome back, sir.
Good to be with you.
So explain why you were against this strike.
Well, Chuck, for a start, let's all recognize that in a world full of disgusting dictators, Bashar Assad maybe ranks at the top. This is a guy, in order to hang on to power, has allowed 400,000 people in his own country to be killed and millions to be displaced. Our goal long-term has got to work with countries around the world. We cannot do it unilaterally. We've got to work with countries around the world for a political solution to get rid of this guy and to finally bring peace and stability to this country, which has been so decimated. I do not believe, to answer your question, that the president simply has the authority to launch missiles. I think he has got to come to the United States Congress. I think he has got to explain to us what his long-term goals are. Chuck, let me just say this. Maybe the most important vote that I have ever cast in my life as a member of Congress was against the war in Iraq. When we get sucked into a war, we do not know the unintended consequences. It is easy to get into a war than it is to get out of a war, as we have learned now over the last 15 years in the Middle East.
Is there a point where humanitarian a cause sort of trumps that, where you see the gassing of people? Is there a point where America's moral authority is being challenged here and you have to send a military message because no one else is going to do that and nothing else will deter Assad? Do you ever believe there's a moment like that?
What we are seeing in Syria is the disintegration and the destruction of an entire country. It is horrible beyond horrible. Yes, I mean, what can we say about somebody who gasses men, women, and children in his own country? It is disgusting beyond words. But what we have got to do is be smart and figure out what is the rational solution. Is putting 50 missiles into Syria going to solve that problem? At the end of the day, in my view, we have got to learn about what the war, the failure of our efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan, not repeat them, understand that it will be diplomacy, demanding that Russia, demanding that Iran sit down at the table with the rest of the world and help us solve this problem.
They've been calling for that for 3 years now. There has been this, the talks in Geneva. Then Secretary of State John Kerry kept going back to the table. The Russians and the Iranians don't look like they're interested in a diplomatic political solution here.
Look, Chuck, you're right. Chuck, you're right. Look, this is an extremely complicated and difficult issue. But I can also tell you that we have been in war in Iraq and Afghanistan for 14 years. Thousands of American soldiers have died. The whole Middle East has been thrown into an uproar, massive instability. You know, all that I'm saying here is that we have got to be clear about what our goals are, not do it unilaterally, and understand also, may I say, that when we have a collapsing middle class and 28 million people without any health insurance and an infrastructure that needs $1 trillion of repair, that maybe we don't want to throw trillions of dollars more into unending perpetual warfare in the Middle East.
You know, in December of 2015...
So wasn't, of all the clips I showed, all 19 clips, wasn't really that the best clip that really put it all in context? You know, I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries. I wish he had been the nominee, and he was actually saying a lot of the things that Donald Trump said during the campaign that helped get him votes from people who might have voted for Bernie Sanders, you know, talking about our, you know, misadventures in the Middle East and how it was draining our resources, and that's why Donald Trump was supposedly not quite the interventionist that maybe Hillary Clinton was going to be, and that's why a lot of his supporters, the non-interventionist supporters, were upset by what happened this week. And, you know, Bernie Sanders, you know, all he was saying is give peace a chance. We have to get out of this endless war. I thought that was definitely worth watching, and I thought Chuck Todd did a good job moving that conversation along in a way that brought out those points, kind of in the way he started off his broadcast, putting Trump's strike on Syria in the context of 7 consecutive presidents engaging in military action in the Middle East. It seems that is, I think that's too much. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section. For my biggest fans who like wait and still watch all the way here down at the end of the program, first I wanted to let you see that Sandy did show up for the program. So yeah, there's your candid Sandy showing up. She just showed up for the last few clips there, and I took that picture for you. And like I was saying earlier in the program, if you want to help support my channel, I do appreciate those of you who give the supportive comments, give me a thumbs up. But there may be some sort of crisis of YouTube coming up for channels like mine. About 2/3 of the revenue I get does come from ad revenue. About 1/3 of it comes from my Patreon revenue. I appreciate all of my patrons. You can even just give me a $1 tip on Patreon per month by becoming a patron down in that link in the video description. Hopefully this big drop in YouTube ad revenue will just be a passing phase. It's happened before, but otherwise, losing 2/3 of my revenue, I mean, I could do this without really getting paid for it, but I'm coming up on my 4-year anniversary of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. This is number 207. Next week will be 208. I think actually Friday, April 14th, is 2013 was the first LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. So the 4-year anniversary is actually this Friday. I won't be doing a show, but this Sunday I'll be doing the 4-year anniversary show. I don't think anything will be special about that other than the fact that it might not be monetized, or it will be barely monetized, and I could keep doing this show just as a hobby, as a labor of love, but doing it every single Sunday, giving up, you know, 8 or 10 hours of my Sundays for 4 years in a row, that as just a hobby, I don't know if I can really justify that, but I don't know. I will still be doing my show next Sunday, which is Easter. I will broadcast a show, and I will keep broadcasting for the foreseeable future, but if YouTube keeps trying to strangle the channels that do controversial programming like mine, I may have to reassess eventually, or try to find some other source of income, or I don't know. I'll let you know. But like I usually say, I appreciate all of you who support my channel, both through comments, thumbs up, patrons. No super chat this week, but the whole live stream was messed up, so hopefully that won't happen next week, when I will be on a little earlier, and it probably won't be as heavy internet usage, who knows. But until next week, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around